The slap came so suddenly, so violently, that the sound echoed across the entire ballroom like the crack of a whip. My head jerked to the side, my glasses flew off, skidding across the polished marble floor until they shattered into 100 tiny shards. For a few seconds, the world spun in slow motion. I could hear the orchestra's music stutter to an awkward stop, forks and champagne glasses clinking as guests froze mid-bite, their mouths half open in disbelief. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and in that moment, I became the unwilling centerpiece of my son's wedding day. The sting on my cheek was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the searing humiliation in my chest. I pressed a trembling hand against my burning skin, stunned that my daughter-in-law, the bride in her ivory gown, had just slapped me with such venom that it stripped me of breath and dignity in a single gesture. "That's what you get for being so selfish," Eleanor Dawson screamed, her manicured finger pointing at me as her voice sliced through the stunned silence. Her pristine white veil shimmered under the golden chandeliers as she shook with fury. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space. Your apartment belongs to us now. Ethan and I need it for our new life." The room was suffocatingly quiet. I bent down to pick up the broken pieces of my glasses, my fingers trembling as though each shard carried the weight of every insult I had swallowed in silence. But the silence around me was worse than the slap. Not one guest stepped forward. Not one friend, not even my own son, reached out to help. The air was thick with whispers, pity, judgment, discomfort. Yet no one dared to stand between the furious bride and the mother-in-law she had just publicly humiliated. Ethan, my son, stood only a few feet away, frozen in his tuxedo, his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were glued to the parquet floor, as if by lowering his gaze he could erase me from existence. My heart clenched at the sight of him, my only child, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love after my husband died, standing there as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Eleanor continued, her voice sharp as broken glass. She smoothed her wedding gown with a deliberate flick of her hand, as though nothing had happened, as though striking an old woman across the face was as natural as adjusting a pearl necklace. "This is my day. Ethan and I need privacy to start our new life. Your apartment is perfect for us. You should be grateful we're willing to take care of it." Her words were pure poison, laced with entitlement that had been festering beneath her polished exterior for months. I had endured her condescending smirks about my discount store clothing, her disdain for my aging car, her mocking remarks about my part-time job at the flower shop. But this was a line that should never have been crossed. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the outlines of the chandeliers and the curious faces surrounding me. Slowly, deliberately, I rose to my feet. My legs trembled beneath the weight of grief and betrayal, but something else began to stir inside me, a flame I had smothered for far too long. That slap had not only cracked my glasses, it had shattered the fragile mask I had worn for years, the mask of a humble widow living quietly on the fringes of society. What no one in that ballroom knew, not the guests, not Eleanor, not even my son, was that the image I had presented to the world was an illusion, a carefully crafted disguise. For decades I had lived modestly, driving a used car, clipping coupons, buying clearance rack clothing, all to protect a truth that now surged within me like a tide ready to break. My late husband, Robert Caldwell, had not been the ordinary office worker everyone assumed he was. Together, we had built a fortune hidden in plain sight, and now the very family who thought me weak and disposable was about to learn the truth. I looked one last time at Ethan, his shoulders hunched, his chin tucked down, as though shame alone could swallow him whole. He said nothing. He did nothing. He was my son, my blood, and yet he stood as silent as a stranger. The final crack in my heart deepened into something irreversible. I clutched my purse, my hand trembling only slightly as I fumbled for the phone I hadn't intended to use again. Not tonight, not ever, unless absolutely necessary. But the slap had changed everything. I dialed the number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in over a year. "Carlos," I whispered into the phone, my voice shaking but firm. "It's Martha. I need you at the Royal Oaks Ballroom. Immediately. Bring the documents." There was a pause on the other end, then a low, steady voice. "Are you certain, Mrs. Caldwell? Once we do this, there's no turning back." I turned my gaze toward the glittering ballroom where Eleanor was laughing with her bridesmaids, telling them how she had put her mother-in-law in her place. My son stood beside her, a weak smile plastered across his face, his silence an even greater betrayal than Eleanor's slap. "I'm certain," I said, my voice cold with resolve. 30 minutes, Carlos, no more." I hung up and walked toward the exit, the weight of every whisper pressing on my back, but my steps were steady, unflinching. The air outside was cooler, the night sky clear, the parking lot bathed in the glow of silver streetlights. I sank into the driver's seat of my old sedan, the familiar hum of the engine a small comfort against the storm raging inside me. And there, in the solitude of my car, I let the memories of the last 2 years wash over me. Every smirk, every insult, every calculated word Eleanor had used to chip away at my dignity. For years I had chosen silence, believing that endurance was strength, that humility was protection. But tonight had proven me wrong. Tonight, silence had nearly destroyed me. In 30 minutes, they would know the truth. In 30 minutes, the mask I had worn for decades would fall away. And in 30 minutes, Eleanor and Ethan Caldwell would learn the true meaning of regret. The parking lot glowed in a hush of sodium lights, everything rimmed in a faint, unreal orange. From inside my sedan, the ballroom's golden windows looked like an aquarium, bridesmaids drifting past like fancy fish, tuxedoed silhouettes gliding from table to table. The music had started again, softer now, but even through the glass I could sense the strain, the way a party goes on because people don't know what else to do. I watched my hands on the steering wheel. They weren't shaking anymore. 30 minutes, I'd told Carlos. 30 minutes to bring the file that would change everything. 30 minutes to trade the quiet life I had curated for decades for something sharp, public, irreversible. That kind of choice doesn't arrive without warning. The truth is, it had been walking toward me for 2 years. It had walked into my living room the first time my son brought Eleanor over to meet Mom, the careful cheer in his voice telling me this visit mattered more than he wanted to admit. She'd stepped in with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "What a cozy place," she'd said, scanning the room with a quick, appraising glance. It wasn't hostile, not exactly, but it was the look you give a house you might flip. My apartment has hardwood floors that creak in the middle and windows that gather afternoon light like honey. The couch is older than it should be, the coffee table is nicked, and the curtains are the floral ones I sewed myself after Robert died. That afternoon, as Eleanor's gaze slid past the framed photograph of Robert and me on the Jersey shore, she glanced toward the balcony, toward the skyline I've never taken for granted, and I understood something essential. This wasn't a visit. It was a survey. "Tea?" I asked. "Or coffee?" "I'm doing lemon water," she said lightly, like a person who always chooses the right thing, then half turned to my son. "Babe, didn't we say we were cutting caffeine this month?" Ethan laughed, the easy, eager laugh of a man in love, and something in me softened in spite of myself. I wanted her to be kind. I still want that for him, if I'm honest. But kindness is sometimes the last thing rich, pretty people think they need to bring to the table. It didn't begin with insults. It began with help. She'd come by with a brochure tucked into her tote, Senior Living with Dignity, glossy photos of smiling couples walking under maples. "You know, just options," she'd say, voice dipped in concern. "It's really a lot for one person to keep up with. This building, that balcony, all the maintenance, and the city can be isolating." Each sentence was perfectly sanded down, nothing you could fault in court. But the message was not subtle. You shouldn't be here. Not anymore. Let alone in this zip code, this view. Besides, she'd add, you deserve to be spoiled a little. Chef-driven dining, weekly housekeeping, scheduled social activities. No more errands, no more stress. No more keys, I thought. It moved in increments. I'd come back from the flower shop to find Ethan tightening a loose knob in the kitchen, his jacket off, sleeves rolled. "Hey, Mom," he'd say, "Eleanor thinks we should look into one of those medical alert systems for you. Just in case." And the next week, "Hey, Mom, you ever think about downsizing? You could be so comfortable, and I'd worry less." And then, "Eleanor's parents know someone who can get you into a really nice community. There's a wait list, but they can pull strings." Each time he said comfortable, a part of me remembered the years when comfort meant turning the thermostat down and banking the oven's heat. When Robert and I decided we would not live out loud, not in this city, not in this life. "Visible wealth makes you a target," he used to say. "Invisible wealth keeps you free." We made that vow to each other at our kitchen table. Not this one, the old round oak table from our first apartment, while a pot of red sauce simmered and our son played with a plastic fire truck on the linoleum. "We'll tithe to ourselves," Robert had said, smiling at his own joke. "We'll buy boring index funds, not boats. We'll give to causes without a plaque. We'll leave a trail of nothing but kindness." We kept that vow more faithfully than anyone knew. What I didn't foresee was that our invisible wealth wouldn't protect us from family. All our careful modesty had only made me look like a soft target to the wrong people. The first real crack showed on a Tuesday, 6 months into Ethan and Eleanor's courtship, when they dropped by after work. Ethan ducked into the bathroom. Eleanor drifted into the kitchen, phone in hand, and I heard the whisper before I knew I was eavesdropping. "Yes, Mom," she murmured, standing beside my sink, eyes on my refrigerator like it had offended her. "It's a ridiculous waste of space for someone her age." "No, it's not rent-controlled. She owns it. Corner unit, balcony, the whole thing. It's a fortune just sitting there. Honestly, if we position it right, she'll thank us." Position it right. I rinsed my hands a second longer than necessary and walked in, smiling. "Does lemon water still sound good?" She didn't flush. "Perfect," she said, "with lots of ice." After that, the pattern sharpened. "That car is a liability," she said one afternoon, eyeing my 10-year-old sedan. "They're not even safe past a certain mileage. You should really let Ethan handle it." Or, "You're still working? You shouldn't have to. Give yourself permission to rest." It ends up being disorienting, how each sentence sounds reasonable by itself. Death by 1,000 soft suggestions. I will say this for her. She was tireless. She brought catalogs for senior communities and left them in a neat stack on my coffee table. She caught me heading out with a tote for errands and offered to order my groceries. When I told her I liked stopping by the florist's to smell the eucalyptus and pick the cheap stems, she smiled like I'd confessed to eating paste and said she'd book me for a floral subscription instead, something curated and delivered to the door. The trap in every accommodation was the same. She wanted every road to bypass my front door and lead to theirs. Ethan didn't see it, or pretended not to. That's the thing about the people we love. We keep granting them the benefit of the doubt until doubt is all we have. He would sit beside her on my sofa with his knee touching hers, nodding along to terms and timelines, and every nod shaved away another sliver of the boy who once insisted on tying my shoes after my back surgery, who once came home furious because a middle school teacher made a joke about old moms in front of the class. When you're the one being slowly pushed out of your life, your memory is both a comfort and a knife. It got worse after they got engaged. That's when options became plans. She arrived with a binder, tabs labeled with dates and costs and bullet points, and I realized that somewhere along the line, this girl had started project managing my existence. "We booked a tour," she said brightly, "just to see. The community has a shuttle to your favorite grocery and a book club you'll love." In my own living room, at my own coffee table, she slid a brochure toward me like a pamphlet handed across a doctor's desk, staged in kindness, freighted with inevitability. I'm not proud of this next part, but it's the truth. I considered it. Not the residence, God no, but the idea of getting ahead of her. I thought, if I choose a smaller space on my own, maybe she'll stop hunting me like a prize. Maybe Ethan will quiet down. Maybe peace is worth surrender. When you're tired enough, capitulation can dress itself up as wisdom. Then came the ambush. 2 weeks before the wedding, she and Ethan arrived with her parents. The Dawsons smelled like cologne and expensive dry cleaning, and they took seats at my table like a board entering a meeting. Eleanor's mother wore the kind of smile people reserve for waiters and teachers. Her father carried a thick manila folder. "Aurora," Mrs. Dawson began, hands folded, tones syrupy. "We're all just so invested in your future." "We've done some research," Mr. Dawson said, opening his folder. "The residence we're recommending would cost around $2,500 a month. With the sale of this apartment," he lifted his eyes and smiled, the practiced smile of a man who has finalized deals in polished conference rooms, "you'd be set for decades, and some cash left to help the kids get started. It's a win-win." My son nodded, eyes shining with the gratitude of a man handed a solution he didn't earn. Eleanor reached for his hand. "It's about safety," she said. "It's about community. We just want to make sure you're okay." "And if I'm not interested?" I asked quietly. Silence hummed like a neon sign. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, let's not make this harder than it needs to be." That night, after they left with their folder and their confident timeline, I cried in the kitchen with my dish towel in my hand like a lifeline. Not because I was being pressured, that I could handle, but because my son looked like a stranger sitting beside people who saw me as a ledger line. I slept 3 hours, woke before dawn, and called an old friend. "Patricia," I said when she answered, still sleepy, "I need a favor," quietly. Patricia Moore has closed more real estate transactions in this city than anyone I know. She's also the person who helped Robert and me find this apartment after 2 years of looking, because she knew how much the light would mean to me. She met me for coffee by noon, hair in a neat bun, legal pad ready. "I need to know everything about their financial picture," I said. "Ethan and Eleanor. Not rumors, not vibes, facts." Patricia's eyebrows ticked up, but she didn't ask why. "Give me 48 hours, she said. "Maybe less." She called me the next day at 5:40 p.m. and asked if she could come up. She sat at my table and slid a thin packet toward me like an oncologist delivering results. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but you need to see this." Debt. Everywhere. Revolving balances maxed at numbers that made my chest ache. Car payments stacked on top of personal loans stacked on top of missed rent. Paycheck to paycheck would be an upgrade from this. The wedding? A monument to borrowed money. The honeymoon? A mirage paid for with points they didn't have. They were not building a life. They were bailing an ocean with a cup. I stared at the page where Patricia had penciled 3 numbers. Their combined income, their combined monthly obligations, and the gap between them. "They're not solvent," she said gently. "They're desperate. Desperate people do terrible math. Desperate people call your home a plan." "What about Ethan?" I asked, voice too thin. "How long has it been like this?" Patricia hesitated. "You should know," she said at last, "that some of the payments you've been making for his credit cards, car insurance, the lease guarantee, none of that is invisible from a certain angle. I think he stopped asking himself where the lifeline came from. I think he decided it was luck. Luck. My monthly transfers, disguised as this refund, that rebate, 1,000 little fictions, had allowed him to pretend he was a man standing on solid ground instead of a pier with rotten boards. I had done that. I had helped. That night I called the other person I swore I wouldn't call unless the ground beneath me split open. "Carlos," I said when he answered, warm and professional, "I need to review the contingency binder." He didn't breathe for a second. Then, understood. "Do you want the long version or the short version?" "Both." The long version took 2 hours over tea. The short version fit in a single sentence. "You have options, and you are not powerless." Carlos Jones is the person Robert and I chose when we decided we needed a grown-up in the room. Someone who could look at numbers without flinching and at people without being dazzled. He helped us build what we built and hide what we hid without lying to the IRS, the SEC, or our neighbors. He's the reason I could work at a flower shop 3 days a week because I liked how my hands smelled afterward. not because I needed the paycheck. He's the one who double-checked our will twice a year and drafted a clause that could be activated with a single notarized sentence if our son ever tried to force guardianship. The clause felt paranoid when we signed it. It felt prescient when Eleanor started carrying binders to my apartment. We reviewed everything that week. The trusts, the titles, the list of charities I'd circled for years with a pencil, half dreaming. The letters Robert wrote me before his final surgery, tucked into the back of the file, each one in his precise print. If you're reading this, it means you're about to do something hard. Do it. Please don't let love bully you into believing you're less than you are. I didn't take any action then. I made one choice only. I stopped apologizing in my own home. When Eleanor said safety, I said autonomy. When she said practicality, I said dignity. When she said, this isn't personal, I said, it's mine. The more direct pressure began 5 days before the wedding. I came home with a bag of peonies the wholesaler had practically given away and found a man with a clipboard measuring the exterior line of my balcony from the sidewalk while Eleanor watched from the curb. When he noticed me at the window, he turned to her. Within seconds, they had both disappeared behind the idling Uber. That night, Joseph, my neighbor, my friend in the truest sense, knocked on my door with a sour look. I don't like it, he said without preamble. I don't like strangers circling your building like buzzards. He's 70, retired from the transit authority, wiry as a stray cat and just as loyal. He was the first person to tape a note on my door after Robert died. I made extra soup. If you like soup, there's soup. He watches everything from his balcony and pretends he doesn't. That afternoon, he saw enough to share. She got out with him, he said. He had a metal tape and a folder. I heard her say something about comps. Comps. Comparable sales. The word felt like a cold hand on my neck. 3 days before the wedding, the campaign turned explicit. Eleanor arrived without Ethan and stood in my doorway with her engagement ring flashing like a weapon. We need you to be reasonable, she said. This is what people your age do. They transition. They stop clinging to things that don't fit. Things, I repeated. She didn't blink. It's not just about us, she said. It's about you. You're lonely here, even if you don't admit it. You should be with people who understand what you're going through. And what exactly, I asked, do you think I'm going through? Decline, she said softly, as if it were a mercy. Everyone declines. When someone tells you who they think you are, believe them. I believed her then, not because she was right, she wasn't, but because she had finally said the quiet part out loud. To Eleanor, I wasn't a person with a life and a history and a brain that still loved cryptograms and recipes with too many steps. I was a demographic, a unit, a key on a ring she wanted. I didn't argue with her. I stepped aside and said, "You can see yourself out." The temperature dropped 10 degrees in her smile. She turned in the doorway. "When he is yours," she said, meaning Ethan, he's your responsibility. When he is mine, he's mine. Pick a lane. That night I couldn't sleep, not because I was scared of her. Fear was there, but it had cooled into something harder. But because I felt a terrible clarity. I had trained my son to believe that soft landings were his birthright. I had made every emergency less urgent, every consequence less sharp, every bill less punishing. I had taught him to confuse my love with a net that would appear whenever he stepped into thin air. Eleanor hadn't made him that way. Not all the way. I had. The day of the wedding dawned bright and stupidly beautiful. I wore the navy dress I bought on sale last spring, the one with the sleeves just long enough to make me feel covered without looking hidden. I set a string of pearls around my neck that Robert gave me for our 30th anniversary, and I thought, I can do this. I can smile and be gracious and leave early if I need to. I can be the mother who doesn't make a mess. You know the rest of that. In the silent minutes after the slap, as 130 guests looked at me and then looked away, as my glasses lay shattered like a prop at my feet, that good plan blew away like confetti. I walked out because I refused to stand and be humiliated in a room where my son keeps his eyes on the floor. I called Carlos because I refused to pretend I am a woman with no choices and no teeth. I sat in my car because it was the only place that felt like mine. In the quiet, I found evidence I didn't know I was looking for. A breath I didn't realize I'd been holding left my lungs. The silence of the car was a kindness. I could hear the steady tick of the cooling engine, the small ping it makes after long drives. I could smell the faint ghost of gardenia from a corsage ribbon left on the passenger seat. Across the lot, a couple in formal wear argued gently, their voices too low to decipher, their hands moving in frustrated italics. Life was going on everywhere, in the ballroom, on the sidewalk, in the city stacked around us. And for once I wasn't trying to keep up with it. I was letting it pass like a parade I didn't need to join. My phone buzzed against the console. A text from an unknown number. "Do you need a ride?" It was one of the bridesmaids. I recognized the name from the program. I typed back, "No, thank you. I'm waiting for a friend." Another buzz. From Ethan, "Mom, where are you? Let's not do this. Please come back inside. Eleanor is upset. Eleanor is upset." I typed a single sentence and deleted it. Typed another and deleted that too. I settled on, "I'm fine. I need some air. Tell the band to play something people can dance to." In the passenger door pocket, a post-it fluttered, yellow turned almost cream with age. It was one of Robert's, the last note he left, taped to the coffee tin. "Back by noon. Don't forget the receipts. Love you." The script hit me like a hand on my shoulder, steady as ever. I tucked it into my wallet where I keep small proofs of better days. Headlights spilled into the lot and crawled toward me. A silver sedan parked 2 spaces over. The driver's door opened and a tall man in a dark suit got out, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Carlos doesn't look like a savior. He looks like what he is, a quiet professional who reads footnotes for sport. He scanned the lot once, found my car, and gave a little nod. It felt like a question and an answer at the same time. I opened my door and stood, the night air cool against the heat remaining in my cheek. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, voice low so as not to turn the lot into a stage. "Are you sure?" I thought about a lemon water voice in my kitchen, about the binder on my coffee table, about my son's thumbs tapping out "Eleanor is upset." I thought about the boy who wrapped pennies in paper sleeves at the coffee table when we were saving for our first mortgage, about the man he became when I could not let him fail. I thought about Robert's note. "Yes," I said. "I'm done apologizing for existing." He nodded once and handed me the portfolio. "Then we'll start with the transfers, and the lease guarantee, and the venue." He paused. "And then the will." I brought both versions, the original and the revision. I held the weight of what he'd brought, the weight of paper, of ink and signatures and lines that move money like water. Light spilled in an amber square across the asphalt from the ballroom door. Someone laughed too loudly, the way people laugh when the story isn't funny. "Not in the lot," I said, tucking the portfolio under my arm. "In there." Carlos's mouth tipped up, not quite a smile. "As you wish." We walked toward the light together, and with every step the past 2 years lined up behind me like dominoes. "Cozy," she'd said. "Options," she'd said. "Safety," she'd said. "Community," she'd said. "Decline," she'd whispered like a prayer. I pressed my palm to the ballroom door, feeling the faint vibration of bass through wood, and realized what had been bothering me most wasn't the slap or the whispers or even my son's silence. It was the way the world had kept trying to make me smaller. My car, my job, my clothes, my space, my choices, until even I was tempted to believe smallness was dignity. My hand fell away from the door. I squared my shoulders. I tucked a stray hair behind my ear like a woman about to step on stage, not because she wants the spotlight, but because she refuses to stand in the wings of her own life. "Ready?" Carlos asked. "Ready," I said. Behind us, the city hummed like a living thing. In front of us, the ballroom glittered like a lie. We walked in. The hum of conversation swelled as I pushed open the heavy ballroom door. The hinges gave a soft groan, though it was lost under the chatter and clink of glasses. For a brief, dizzy moment, I thought perhaps the world had simply moved on without me, that the slap and the whispers and my own exit were only a ripple in an otherwise perfect evening. But then I felt it, the subtle shift in air as heads turned, the way conversations faltered mid-sentence, the invisible line that always forms when someone re-enters a room after a scandal. Every eye found me again, some curious, some pitying, some sharp with judgment. I kept my gaze forward, shoulders square. Carlos walked beside me, his stride steady, portfolio tucked under his arm like an extension of himself. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone was anchor enough. The ballroom, decorated in shades of cream and gold, shimmered with chandeliers and tall floral arrangements. But the glittering surfaces couldn't mask the tension. It clung to the room like smoke. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering behind raised hands. Waiters paused mid-step, unsure whether to continue serving champagne or to hold back. And then I saw them. Eleanor, radiant still in her gown, stood near the head table, a champagne flute dangling loosely from her fingers. She was laughing too loudly at something one of her bridesmaids had said, her gestures sharp, exaggerated. But her laughter snapped like glass when her eyes landed on me. Her smile froze, lips tightening into a thin, cold line. Ethan stood beside her, his bow tie slightly crooked, his jaw clenched. He looked pale, almost ill, as though the weight of the evening had finally settled on his shoulders. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, just long enough for me to see a flash of something raw, something childlike. But he looked away almost instantly, retreating into the safety of avoidance. I didn't flinch. I didn't break stride. Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Thompson, the manager of the venue, intercepted me with polite urgency. His tuxedo was impeccable, his smile thin. "Perhaps it would be best if you—" "Not now," I said, my voice calm but firm, my eyes never leaving Eleanor's. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here to clarify one." He hesitated, caught between duty and discomfort. Then, perhaps sensing Carlos's steady presence beside me, he stepped aside. The orchestra was halfway through a syrupy rendition of a Sinatra classic. I lifted a hand, and with a nod from Carlos, the conductor faltered, strings trailing into silence. The sudden hush fell heavy, like a curtain dropping in the middle of a play. All eyes turned again, this time expectant, restless. I walked to the center of the room, the heels of my shoes clicking against the polished parquet floor. I could feel the tremor of my own heartbeat, but my steps were even, deliberate. When I reached the space before the head table, I stopped. "I owe you all an apology," I began, my voice carrying easily in the silence. "Not for what you might think, not for the scene earlier, and certainly not for existing in this room, but for pretending, all these years, to be someone I am not." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I caught the flicker of raised eyebrows, the slight shake of heads. Eleanor stiffened, her knuckles white around the stem of her glass. Ethan shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between me and his bride. "For decades," I continued, "I lived modestly. I drove an old car, wore second-hand clothes, clipped coupons, and worked part-time at a flower shop. Many of you know me as that woman, the quiet widow, the one who never seemed to have much, and I let you believe that story because it was easier, safer." I paused, scanning the room. The silence pressed closer, heavy with curiosity. "But tonight," I said, my voice steady, "I was reminded that silence can be mistaken for weakness, and weakness in the wrong hands becomes a weapon." I turned my gaze to Eleanor, whose face remained frozen, her eyes sharp with anger. "What you did tonight was not a slip of temper. It was the culmination of months, years of pressure, manipulation, and greed. You believed I was an obstacle, a burden, a woman with no power and no options, and you were wrong." Gasps flitted through the crowd. Eleanor's bridesmaids exchanged nervous glances. Her parents, seated at a nearby table, shifted uncomfortably, Mr. Dawson adjusting his tie as though it had suddenly become too tight. Carlos stepped forward then, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Carlos Ramirez. I have been Mrs. Caldwell's financial advisor and attorney for over 20 years. What she is about to share is not rumor, it is fact. Documented, notarized, and legally binding." He set the portfolio on a nearby table, unclasped it, and drew out a stack of papers. The rustle of paper against polished wood seemed louder than it should have been, a small sound amplified by the weight of anticipation. But I raised a hand, stopping him. Not yet. This isn't about papers. This is about truth. I turned back to the guests, to the sea of faces watching me with wide eyes. The truth is that I am not broke. I never was. Robert and I built a life of quiet means. We invested, we saved, we prepared. We did it quietly because we believed discretion was protection. And it was, until those closest to me mistook modesty for vulnerability. Eleanor's voice cracked through the silence like a whip. This is insane. She's making things up, she's embarrassed and trying to ruin my wedding. Her outburst rang shrill in the quiet, but no one moved to echo her outrage. Instead, heads turned back to me. I could see doubt flickering in their eyes, not at me, but at her. I don't need to ruin anything, I said softly, my voice carrying nonetheless. You've done that yourself. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Carlos spoke again, his voice firm, authoritative. The documents here include termination of lease guarantees, cancellation of financial support, and revisions to Mrs. Caldwell's will, effective immediately. Ethan staggered as though struck. His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Eleanor dropped her glass, the stem shattering against the floor, champagne fizzing into the cracks. Gasps rippled through the crowd, sharp and immediate. I didn't flinch. I didn't move to comfort my son. You wanted my apartment, I said, my voice quiet but cutting. You wanted my life. But what you never understood is that my life is not a piece of real estate. It's not a line in a ledger. And it will not be handed to anyone who believes love is a tool of control. The silence that followed was vast, stretching across the glittering ballroom, swallowing even the faint hum of air conditioning. I stood in it, calm, unshaken, the fire that had been smoldering in me for years finally free. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something sharp and undeniable in my chest. Power. The silence inside the ballroom could have sliced through glass. For a moment, it felt as if the chandeliers themselves had stopped shimmering, as though even light was holding its breath. Martha Hughes stood her ground at the center of the parquet floor, her back straight, her hands trembling only slightly as she clutched the small leather folder Carlos had pressed into her palms minutes earlier. This, she began, her voice carrying farther than she expected, is the truth none of you were supposed to hear tonight. 130 pairs of eyes followed her every movement. Some guests leaned forward in their chairs, others gripped the edges of the white tablecloths as if to anchor themselves to reality. Eleanor, the freshly humiliated bride, shifted uneasily, her manicured hands twisting the hem of her designer gown. Ethan, still pale from the earlier confrontation, could only mutter, "Mom, please, don't do this here." But Martha's answer was steel. There will never be a better place, and there will never be a better time. You wanted a public spectacle? Then let's give the people one. Carlos Ramirez, tall, calm, every bit the seasoned attorney, stepped forward. His presence radiated authority, the kind that silences objections before they leave a mouth. He placed a slim stack of documents on the nearest table, beside the untouched wedding cake. His tone was measured, but devastating. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the guests as if they were a jury, "what you are about to hear may sound like the plot of a courtroom drama, but I assure you, every page here is evidence, every signature authentic, every number verifiable." He opened the first folder with deliberate precision. Exhibit A, 5 separate credit card accounts fraudulently opened in the name of Mrs. Hughes. Total balance owed $47,200. Charges include luxury handbags, high-end electronics, a 2-week stay at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami. These are not the purchases of a 70-year-old widow living quietly in her modest apartment. These are the indulgences of Eleanor Dawson, his gaze flicked to the bride, and the complicity of her husband, Ethan Hughes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the second row covered her mouth with her hands. Someone whispered, "My God, that trip." Another muttered, "So that's how they afforded this wedding." Eleanor lunged forward, face crimson. "Lies, all lies." Carlos did not blink. He He simply lifted a photocopy of a credit application. This is Eleanor's handwriting, confirmed by forensic analysis. And here, he pointed, is Ethan's forged signature, presented as his mother's. The bank's fraud division has already flagged these accounts. We filed the report last week. Martha felt the room sway, not from weakness, but from the weight of vindication. For months she had questioned her own instincts, wondered if paranoia had made her unfair. Now, with every page Carlos revealed, her reality sharpened like glass. Carlos moved to the next file. Exhibit B, a draft petition for guardianship, prepared by a law firm 3 towns over. This document, he held it up so the guests could see the bold letters. Requests that the court declare Mrs. Hughes mentally incompetent. The petition was never filed because it lacked medical certification. But attached to the draft, you will find a series of emails between Ethan Hughes and a physician offering a generous consulting fee in exchange for a false diagnosis of dementia. The room erupted in horrified murmurs. Martha saw an elderly couple at the back shake their heads, eyes wide with disbelief. One of Ethan's college friends muttered under his breath, "Jesus, Ethan, what the hell have you done?" Ethan's face drained of color. That's not how it looks. It looks exactly as it is," Martha interrupted, her voice trembling with fury. "You were willing to strip me of my name, my autonomy, my dignity, just to get your hands on what you thought was my money." She turned to the guests, her voice breaking but loud enough for all to hear. "I raised that boy. I worked 2 jobs while he slept safe in his bed. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, friendships, so he would never miss a meal. And this is what I get in return. Betrayal wrapped in forged documents and whispered lies." The guests were transfixed. Some looked away, ashamed to be witnessing such raw pain. Others stared openly, as if watching a tragedy unfold on stage. Carlos pressed on. Exhibit C, real estate documents. Here we have emails between Eleanor and a property broker discussing the sale of Mrs. Hughes's apartment. Estimated value, $620,000. Eleanor's own words in one email, "We need to move quickly before she realizes what's happening." Eleanor shouted, "That's taken out of context." Carlos arched a brow. "Out of context? Would you like me to read the rest? The part where you say, and I quote, 'Once she's in the nursing home, we can liquidate without interference.'" The ballroom was so quiet, Martha could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every guest's face now reflected disgust, not sympathy. Eleanor looked around desperately, but no ally met her gaze. At this moment, Martha stepped forward, her voice soft but sharp as a knife. "You thought I was powerless. You thought I was alone, but I am not powerless, and I am not alone. Tonight you lose not only my support, but the respect of every person here." Ethan's voice cracked. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We're family." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but her tone was iron. Family does not betray. Family does not steal. Family does not try to drive you insane. She lifted the final envelope, and this is my amended will. Effective immediately. Neither Ethan Hughes nor Eleanor Dawson will inherit a single cent from me. Everything will be placed in trust to organizations that fight elder abuse, to scholarships for children who actually value their education, and to people who understand that loyalty is earned, not demanded. The guests erupted, not in applause, but in murmurs of approval, nods of solidarity. It was the sound of a community taking sides, and it was not Ethan and Eleanor's side. Carlos closed the folder with a snap that echoed like a gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence speaks for itself. This is not merely a family squabble. It is a conspiracy of fraud, abuse, and exploitation, and tonight it ends." For a moment, silence reigned again. Then, like a tide breaking, the whispers rose. "She's so brave. I can't believe they did that to her. What monsters." Eleanor collapsed into a chair, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. Ethan stood frozen, caught between anger and shame, but unable to move in either direction. Martha inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the moment settle. For the first time in years, she felt taller, stronger, untouchable. "This wedding," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is over." And with that, she turned her back on her son, on her daughter-in-law, on the ashes of the family she had sacrificed for. The guests parted like water, creating a path for her exit. Some reached out to touch her arm in quiet support. Others simply bowed their heads as she passed, as though acknowledging not just her pain, but her victory. When she reached the ballroom doors, Martha paused. She looked back only once, her gaze sweeping across the stunned crowd, the humiliated couple, the shattered illusion of a perfect celebration. "This is not the end," she declared. "It is the beginning of my freedom." And then she stepped into the corridor, the heavy doors closing behind her with a final resonant thud. The night air was cool as Martha stepped out of the ballroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor of the Grand Hotel corridor. For the first time in decades, she felt the air rush through her lungs, as though she had broken through a cage. Behind her, muffled chaos still rumbled. The voices of shocked guests, the sobs of Eleanor, the stammering excuses of Ethan, but Martha no longer belonged to that world. Carlos caught up to her, his leather briefcase in hand. "You did it," he said softly, though his eyes were blazing with pride. "You stood taller than both of them combined." Martha exhaled, her voice weary but resolute. "No, Carlos, tonight I only opened the door. Now I need to walk through it, and I need to make sure they can never shut it again." They exited the hotel. A light drizzle fell, the streetlights shimmering against wet pavement. Carlos raised an umbrella, but Martha shook her head. She wanted to feel the rain, to let it wash away the residue of betrayal clinging to her skin. "Where do we start?" she asked. Carlos gave her the kind of smile only a man who loved the fight could muster. "With everything. We start by documenting, securing, and building a fortress around you. Tonight was the first strike. Tomorrow, we prepare for war." The next morning, Martha's apartment was no longer a quiet refuge. It became a command center. Patricia Moore, her old friend from the real estate business, arrived with a laptop and boxes of property records. Anna Mitchell, her granddaughter, who had chosen integrity over blood loyalty, brought stacks of photographs and a determination that burned in her youthful eyes. Henry Walker, the neighbor who had witnessed Eleanor's cruelty one too many times, contributed a thumb drive full of videos he had recorded discreetly, shouting matches, suspicious visitors, even Ethan sneaking away at night to meet with loan sharks. "Are we really doing this?" Anna asked, setting her bag down with a nervous smile. "Like an actual case? Against family?" Martha placed a hand on her shoulder. "They stopped being family the moment they tried to steal my sanity. Now they are opponents, and we treat them as such." Patricia tapped her keyboard, pulling up property valuations. "I checked county records. Eleanor had already made inquiries about putting your condo on the market. If she had managed to push that guardianship petition through, they would have flipped your home within weeks." Henry added gruffly, "I've lived next door 30 years, Martha. I saw what they were up to, and I'm ready to swear it all under oath. You won't be standing alone." Martha looked around the room at these faces. Different ages, different histories, yet bound together by loyalty. Her chest tightened, but not with sorrow, with gratitude. "Then let's make a pact," she said. "If they wanted to break me alone, then together we'll make them regret it." Carlos arrived at noon with thick folders. He placed them carefully on the dining table, now cleared of Martha's lace tablecloth and replaced with legal pads and coffee cups. "Here's the strategy," he explained. "Step 1, we file fraud charges. The credit card companies are already cooperating. Step 2, we petition for a restraining order. That keeps them away from you physically and financially. Step 3, we take control of the narrative before they do." Martha frowned. "The narrative?" "Yes," Carlos said firmly. "Eleanor is cunning. She'll spin this as the story of a confused old woman manipulated by outsiders. We have to cut her off at the knees before she tries it." Anna spoke up. "Grandma, what if you went public? Not just to guests at the wedding, but to the community, the news. People need to see the truth." Patricia nodded. "Olivia Sanders owes me a favor. She's a reporter at Channel 7. If she hears about elder abuse with evidence this strong, she'll make sure the whole city knows." For a moment, Martha hesitated. She had lived her life in quiet dignity, never seeking the spotlight. But then she remembered Eleanor's hissed words, the plans to lock her in a nursing home, the laughter at the thought of her losing her mind. "No more silence," Martha whispered. "If they tried to bury me in darkness, then I will drag the truth into the brightest light I can find." The following days unfolded with a rhythm both exhausting and exhilarating. Martha sat with Carlos in his office, recording sworn statements, her voice steady as she recounted the threats and forged documents. Henry delivered his thumb drive. Investigators confirmed the video's authenticity. Patricia compiled financial analyses showing how Eleanor and Ethan's debts had spiraled: gambling, luxury purchases, payday loans. Anna, brave beyond her years, offered testimony of conversations she had overheard, Eleanor mocking her grandmother, Ethan whispering about Plan B. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of their scheme. Carlos worked like a conductor, orchestrating the evidence into a symphony of inevitability. One evening, after hours of sorting through paperwork, Martha sat alone in her kitchen. The others had gone home, the apartment quiet again. She stared at an old photograph pinned to the fridge. Ethan at age 5, grinning with a gap-toothed smile, frosting smeared across his cheeks at a birthday party she had saved up for months to afford. Her eyes stung. "Where did that boy go?" she whispered. "When did he turn into a man who could do this to me?" The door creaked open. Anna had returned for her forgotten jacket. She saw the tears in Martha's eyes and approached carefully. "Grandma?" Martha shook her head, brushing at her cheeks. "I thought I had lost everything when my husband died, but this, losing the son I thought I raised." Anna wrapped her arms around her. "You didn't lose everything. You still have me, and you still have yourself. That's more than they'll ever understand." Martha clutched her granddaughter tight, her heart aching but also healing. In that embrace, she felt a truth stronger than betrayal. Family was not defined by blood, but by love freely chosen. By the end of the week, Olivia Sanders from Channel 7 sat across Martha in her living room, a camera crew setting up lights. Martha wore a simple navy dress, her silver hair combed neatly, her hands folded but firm. Olivia leaned in. "Mrs. Hughes, are you sure you're ready for this? Once we air your story, there's no going back." Martha looked straight into the camera lens. "My daughter-in-law struck me in front of 100 witnesses. My son plotted to declare me insane. If I stay quiet now, I am complicit in my own destruction, so yes, I'm ready." The interview aired 2 nights later. By morning, Martha's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in, strangers thanking her for her courage, other seniors sharing their own stories of abuse, neighbors offering support. She was no longer a victim hidden in the shadows. Across town, Ethan and Eleanor watched the broadcast in silence. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned off the TV. "She's destroying us," she hissed, "in front of the whole city." Ethan buried his face in his hands. "It's worse than that. Carlos has the credit card companies, the emails, the witnesses. We're not just losing her money. We're going to prison." But Eleanor's eyes hardened. "Then we fight dirtier. If she wants war, she'll get one." The courtroom buzzed with tension long before the judge entered. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised, cameras flashing whenever someone shifted in their seat. The story of Aurora Hughes, the widow humiliated at her son's wedding, the woman who exposed years of manipulation, had spread far beyond their community. It was now a case the whole state was watching. Martha sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture upright, her hands calm, though her pulse thundered. Beside her, Carlos flipped through neatly organized folders, every page a weapon sharpened for this battle. Across from them sat Ethan and Eleanor, flanked by their attorneys. Ethan looked pale, his once confident gaze hollow. Eleanor, however, carried herself like a queen in exile, chin high, eyes sharp, though her fingers betrayed her by tapping nervously on the table. When the bailiff called the court to order, the judge entered with an air of solemn authority. "This court will now hear the case of Hughes versus Hughes and Dawson," she announced. "Allegations include financial exploitation, fraud, and attempted unlawful guardianship. Plaintiff, you may proceed." Carlos rose smoothly, His voice was measured, deliberate, designed to strike with precision. Your Honor, today we present not merely a family dispute, but a deliberate conspiracy against a senior citizen. Mrs. Hughes was targeted by her own son and his wife, who sought to strip her of her autonomy, her property, and her dignity. We will show evidence of forged documents, coercive conversations, and financial misconduct that cannot be explained away as misunderstanding. He gestured to Martha, who remained composed. And most damning of all, we will prove that these actions were not born of desperation, but of calculated greed. The defense attorney jumped to his feet. Objection. Counsel is already trying this case in the court of public opinion. The judge lifted a hand. Noted. Proceed with evidence, Mr. Jones. Carlos called the first witness, Henry Walker, Martha's neighbor of 3 decades. Henry shuffled to the stand, his voice gravelly but steady. I've seen them coming and going. I heard the arguments. I recorded some because I feared something wasn't right. The courtroom screens lit up with video clips. Eleanor berating Martha in the hallway, Ethan murmuring about getting her to move out, Eleanor whispering into her phone about the apartment's value. The jurors leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Next came Patricia with stacks of financial reports. These, she explained, tapping the papers, are bank transfers. Mrs. Hughes was secretly paying off Ethan's debts for years. Without her, they would have defaulted long ago. The defense attempted to cross-examine, painting Martha as a controlling mother who inserted herself into her son's finances. But Patricia cut through the insinuations with hard numbers. If generosity is control, then I suppose Mrs. Hughes is guilty of saving them from bankruptcy at least 12 times. Then it was Anna's turn. She took the stand, her young voice trembling but fierce. I heard Eleanor say they were going to declare Grandma incompetent. They laughed about it. They called it Plan B. Eleanor's attorney objected, claiming hearsay, but Anna's steady eyes held the jury. I know what I heard, and I know what it meant. They weren't planning to care for her. They were planning to erase her. Finally, Carlos called the defendant himself, Ethan Hughes. The room shifted, breaths held as Ethan walked slowly to the witness stand. Mr. Hughes, Carlos began, do you deny that your mother paid over $160,000 of your debts in the past 3 years? Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't ask her to. Carlos's tone sharpened. But you accepted it, and while you accepted her money, you and your wife were simultaneously preparing legal documents to declare her unfit. Do you deny that? Ethan's eyes darted toward Eleanor, who glared at him with silent command. We thought she was losing control. We wanted to protect her. Carlos pounced. Protect her by selling her home? Protect her by placing her in a nursing facility against her will? Protect her by calling appraisers behind her back? The courtroom murmured. Ethan's shoulders slumped. I made mistakes, he whispered. Eleanor shot to her feet. Mistakes? Her voice cracked through the chamber. You're weak, Ethan. Always were. This woman, she stabbed a finger toward Martha, has manipulated everyone with her poor me act. Look at her, working in a flower shop, driving a junk car. She fooled us all, hiding her money, making us believe she was helpless while she hoarded millions. The outburst silenced the room. Jurors exchanged glances, some shaking their heads. Eleanor's attorney tugged at her sleeve, horrified, but she shrugged him off. Martha rose slowly, the judge allowing her to speak. Her voice was steady, filled not with anger, but truth. I lived modestly because I valued peace over vanity. My husband and I built a life in the shadows to protect ourselves. But Eleanor, you see kindness as weakness. You see humility as deceit. And Ethan, she turned to her son, whose eyes brimmed with shame. You let love be drowned by greed. Tonight is not my humiliation. It is your revelation. Hours later, after testimonies and deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood, paper in hand. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Aurora Hughes. We recommend immediate restraining orders against Ethan Hughes and Eleanor Dawson, restitution of funds misappropriated, and referral of fraud charges to the district attorney's office. Gasps filled the chamber. Eleanor collapsed into her chair, her perfect composure shattered. Ethan covered his face with his hands, unable to look at his mother. Martha closed her eyes briefly, a single tear slipping free, not of sorrow but of release. Carlos squeezed her hand. "You've won, Mrs. Hughes. Not just the case. Your life back." The judge's gavel struck, echoing like thunder. "This court is adjourned." As Martha walked out of the courtroom into the blinding flash of reporters' cameras, she felt no fear. She was not just a woman who had survived betrayal. She was the woman who had transformed her suffering into victory. And the world was watching. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Aurora Hughes stepped into the sunlight. Microphones thrust forward, cameras clicked in rapid fire, and questions flew like arrows. "Mrs. Hughes, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think your son can ever redeem himself? What message do you have for seniors facing similar abuse?" Aurora paused, her back straight, her chin lifted. "Today was not about victory," she said clearly, her voice carrying over the noise. "It was about truth. Seniors deserve respect, dignity, and autonomy. No one, no matter how close, has the right to strip that away. If my story saves even one person from what I endured, then this pain has had a purpose." The crowd erupted with more questions, but Aurora walked steadily toward Carlos's waiting car. For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her shoulders lift. The chains of secrecy had fallen. She was no longer living in the shadow of fear. She had reclaimed her voice. News outlets devoured the story. By the evening broadcast, every major channel carried footage of Eleanor's courtroom outburst and Ethan's defeated posture. Headlines were merciless. "Bride's slap leads to family's downfall." "The greed that shattered a wedding." "Elder abuse in high society." The Hughes case. Clips of Eleanor screaming, "She fooled us all," went viral, played again and again on social media with captions like, "This is what entitlement looks like." Ethan's tearful denials became memes, his face plastered with words like regret and too late. Their friends distanced themselves overnight. Creditors called in debts. Eleanor's parents, once so smug, were humiliated in their social circles. Invitations vanished, phone calls went unanswered. The Dawson name, once associated with prestige, now carried the stench of scandal. Within weeks, Ethan lost his job. His employer issued a public statement. "Our company does not tolerate behavior that compromises integrity, inside or outside the workplace." Eleanor's budding image consultancy collapsed. No one wanted advice on appearances from a woman exposed as a manipulator. They were forced out of their apartment, creditors seizing assets. The wedding gifts, once symbols of celebration, were repossessed to pay outstanding bills. From the grandeur of a ballroom wedding to a cramped spare bedroom in Eleanor's parents' home, their fall was complete. And yet, amidst the public triumph, Aurora carried private sorrow. Alone in her quiet apartment, she stared at photographs of Ethan as a boy. His gap-toothed grin, the way he had once clung to her hand at the park, his laughter as they baked cookies together. "This isn't the son I raised," she whispered to herself. The boy she remembered was kind, tender, eager to please. That boy had been swallowed by greed and weakness, shaped by a woman's ambition and his own cowardice. Carlos reminded her gently, "You didn't lose today, Aurora. You protected yourself. You stood for every senior who doesn't have the strength you had." But late at night, when the city slept, she sometimes cried, not for justice won, but for the love lost. Letters began pouring in. Strangers wrote from across the country. "Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. My daughter has been pressuring me to sell my home. After hearing your story, I found the courage to say no. You don't know me, but your bravery saved me. I was about to sign papers, transferring power of attorney to my son. I ripped them up. You're a hero, Aurora. Never doubt that." Talk shows debated her case. Some hosts praised her resilience. Others dissected the psychology of children who betray their parents. Advocacy groups invited her to speak at conferences about elder rights. Aurora, once invisible in her modest life, had become a national voice. Her story was no longer just her own. It was a mirror for thousands suffering in silence. Meanwhile, Eleanor unraveled. Neighbors reported shouting matches late at night. She was seen storming out of grocery stores after her credit cards were declined. At one point, a video surfaced of her confronting a journalist on the street, screaming, "You don't know the truth! She manipulated us!" The clip only fueled further ridicule. She tried to contact Aurora, sending rambling letters that veered between apologies and threats. "You can't do this to family. You'll regret turning Ethan against me." Aurora never responded. Ethan, quieter, sank into depression. Former colleagues described him as a ghost of himself. He drank heavily, avoided friends, and once was spotted sitting alone outside his old office building for hours. The contrast was stark. Aurora rising stronger each day, Ethan and Eleanor sinking deeper into the quicksand of their own choices. Back in Aurora's neighborhood, change rippled. Neighbors who had once pitied her now greeted her with admiration. "You showed us what strength looks like," Henry told her, bringing over a homemade pie. "You reminded us we're not powerless, even when it feels like we are." Anna began helping Aurora at the flower shop, her youthful energy a balm against loneliness. Together, they tended roses and lilies, laughing over small joys, weaving healing into daily routines. The apartment that Eleanor had coveted so greedily now bloomed with life, plants thriving on the balcony, sunlight streaming through polished windows, warmth where bitterness once lingered. Aurora often stood there in the evenings, watching the city lights flicker. She had not chosen this path, but she had chosen how to walk it, with dignity, with courage, with unyielding truth. One night, Aurora received a call from a local TV station. They wanted to feature her in a documentary on elder rights. "Your case has opened eyes across the nation," the producer said. "Would you be willing to share more of your journey?" Aurora hesitated only a moment. Then she smiled softly. "If my story can save someone else's dignity, then yes, let's do it." As she hung up, she realized something profound. The slap that had once burned her cheek had ignited a movement. From pain had come purpose. From betrayal had come rebirth. And though she mourned the son she had lost, she knew she had gained something greater. The strength to never again be silent, and the chance to help others find that same voice. 2 years had passed since that unforgettable night, the night when Aurora Hughes's life had been split into before and after. She sat now on the balcony of her apartment, the same place where she had once cried in silence as humiliation weighed on her. But tonight, there was no sorrow. The balcony was alive with hanging plants, fairy lights, and the hum of the city below. She sipped chamomile tea as the phone buzzed with messages of gratitude from people she had never met, but whose lives she had touched. After the verdict, Aurora realized that her story was not hers alone. Letters had poured in by the hundreds, then thousands. Seniors wrote of similar abuse. Children pressuring them to sell homes, family members siphoning retirement funds, relatives threatening to cut off access to grandchildren unless money was given. Aurora knew she could not remain silent. With Carlos's help, she redirected much of her wealth into a nonprofit, the Aurora Hughes Foundation for Senior Protection. The mission was clear: provide legal, financial, and emotional resources to older adults exploited by family. Within a year, the foundation opened its first office downtown, staffed by volunteer lawyers, social workers, and therapists. The cases were overwhelming. A 72-year-old man whose son had gambled away his savings, a widow whose niece had stolen her identity, a grandmother blackmailed by her daughter over custody of grandchildren. Each story mirrored Aurora's own pain, but now she could offer something she had once lacked: hope. By the second year, the foundation expanded to 3 regional centers. Henry, once just her neighbor, now served as vice president, lecturing communities on detecting manipulation. Anna became the director of education, creating workshops for seniors about financial literacy. Patricia, with her real estate expertise, safeguarded elderly clients from predatory sales. Aurora often said with a smile, "The family I lost gave me the family I needed." Media attention never truly faded. 6 months after the trial, Aurora's story aired on Stories of a Lifetime, a program watched by millions. The interview went viral. Aurora, in her modest dress and calm demeanor, became a national symbol of resilience. Publishers approached her, and with the help of a journalist, she wrote a memoir. When Love Hurts, an elderly woman fights back. The book sold over 200,000 copies, translated into several languages. All royalties went directly to the foundation. Universities invited her to lecture. Lawmakers sought her advice on drafting stronger elder protection laws. Aurora found herself speaking not just for herself, but for countless others. "I never asked to be a public figure," she admitted in one interview. "But if sharing my pain prevents another senior from being silenced, then my story is worth telling 1,000 times." Beyond public success, Aurora underwent a personal rebirth. The anxiety that once plagued her melted away. She no longer walked with hunched shoulders, but upright, with a quiet authority. Her doctor marveled at her improved health. Her blood pressure had normalized, her sleep had become restful, her energy renewed. She filled her days with purpose. 3 days a week she worked at the foundation offices. 2 days she spent visiting seniors in their homes, listening to their stories, reminding them they were not alone. Weekends were devoted to the community garden she helped establish in her building, where neighbors grew vegetables and herbs together. Henry teased her once, "Aurora, you've gone from invisible widow to community leader. What's next? Congress?" She laughed, shaking her head. "No politics for me, just people." And yet, one wound remained unhealed. Ethan. He had attempted contact only 3 times in 2 years, each time to ask for money. Never once had he offered a genuine apology, never once acknowledged the harm he had caused. Each call ended with Aurora's quiet refusal. The last conversation had been the hardest. Ethan accused her of choosing pride over family. Aurora had replied firmly, "Pride is not the enemy, Ethan. It's dignity. And dignity is what you threw away when you chose greed over love." Juliet had long since left him, taking their child with her. Rumors reached Aurora that Ethan now lived in a small rented room, working irregular jobs. It broke her heart, but she understood at last she could not rescue him without losing herself. Still, she quietly set up a college trust fund for her grandson, Oliver. She had never met him, but she promised herself, when he turned 18, he would know that his grandmother had not forgotten him. 2 years after the trial, Aurora received an invitation from the state Senate. Lawmakers wanted her testimony for a bill strengthening protections against elder financial abuse. She sat before the committee, her voice steady. "Abuse doesn't always come from strangers," she told them. "Sometimes it wears the face of family. We must stop pretending blood alone guarantees love. Respect, not inheritance, defines family." Her testimony was broadcast statewide. Seniors cheered her words from living rooms and nursing homes. Advocacy groups cited her speech as pivotal in passing new protections. Aurora had once been dismissed as a fragile widow. Now she was shaping laws. One evening, Anna found Aurora writing in her journal. "What are you working on, Auntie?" she asked. Aurora smiled. "My second book. Not about me this time, but about strategies, how seniors can recognize manipulation before it's too late." Anna hugged her. "You've turned the worst night of your life into the best lesson for the world." Aurora looked out at the city skyline, golden in the setting sun. "That's what life is, Anna. Pain becomes wisdom if we let it." She thought of Robert, her late husband. She imagined him smiling, proud of the woman she had become. She thought of Ethan, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. She thought of Oliver, the grandson who might one day knock on her door. And she thought of all the seniors who, because of her story, would never have to face the humiliation she once endured. Her life had been broken open, but from the cracks had grown something stronger than she ever imagined. Dignity, purpose, and legacy. As Aurora prepared for bed that night, her phone buzzed with a notification. A video from the Foundation's newest regional center had just been uploaded. Seniors standing together, holding signs that read respect, autonomy, dignity. Aurora's eyes filled with tears. She whispered to herself, "This is the family I was meant to have." And with that, she turned off the light, knowing her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were too old, too weak, too irrelevant. Aurora Hughes had proven them wrong. The evening sky stretched wide above the city, painted in soft shades of lavender and gold. Aurora Hughes stood at her balcony, the same balcony where she had once hidden her tears, the same balcony where she had whispered her doubts into the night. Now it was a place of stillness, of reflection, of quiet triumph. She leaned against the railing, her cup of tea warm between her palms. Below, the hum of traffic and laughter from nearby cafes rose into the air. Life carried on, messy and vibrant, and for the first time in decades, Aurora felt no burden weighing her down. The world knew her story. From small-town newspapers to national broadcasts, her name had been repeated, dissected, even admired. Yet fame was never what she sought. What mattered to her was not the spotlight, but the ripples her courage had created. Across the country, seniors were speaking out. Families were re-examining their dynamics. Legislators were drafting new protections. She had become a symbol, though she often laughed at the thought. A symbol in secondhand sweaters, she once joked to Anna. But symbols weren't about clothes or cars. They were about truth, and Aurora had spoken hers. Though Ethan remained absent from her life, Aurora no longer carried the heavy ache of resentment. She had come to accept the unchangeable, that love does not always mean loyalty, that blood does not always mean family. In her heart, she mourned the boy Ethan once was, the child with eager eyes and sticky fingers clutching hers. But she had released the man he had become, letting him face the weight of his choices. Acceptance, she discovered, was its own kind of freedom. Her journal entries reflected this shift. Today, I walked past the park where Ethan once flew kites. I did not cry. I smiled because I remember the boy he was, and I let go of the man who is no longer here. Her days were filled with purpose. At the foundation offices, Aurora welcomed seniors who once felt voiceless. She shook their hands, listened to their stories, and told them gently, "You are not alone." Henry teased her that she had turned into the grandmother of the nation, but she wore the title with pride. Anna, living next door, brought laughter and youth into her evenings. Together, they cooked simple meals, shared books, and planned future workshops for the foundation. Patricia remained her closest confidant, often joining her for late-night tea when the city lights sparkled like jewels. Even Carlos, once just her financial advisor, had become like family. He often told her, "Aurora, I've managed many accounts, but yours is the only one that turned numbers into a movement." The community garden bloomed each season, a testament to resilience. Tomatoes, sunflowers, and lavender thrived in the soil, tended by neighbors who once pitied Aurora but now admired her. The apartment Eleanor had coveted so greedily was no longer a symbol of vulnerability. It was a sanctuary of strength. On her desk lay a manuscript, her second book, The Price of Silence, a guide for seniors and their families about recognizing abuse before it begins. Unlike her memoir, this book was not about her pain, but about prevention, about tools for others to guard their dignity. Letters from across the country continued to arrive. One from a woman in Texas read, "Because of you, I stopped my son from taking over my savings. You gave me courage." Another from New York said, "Your words saved me from signing away my house. You may never meet me, but you saved my life." Aurora understood then that her greatest inheritance was not money or property. It was the example she left behind, a reminder that even in the autumn of life, one could rise, resist, and reclaim dignity. One quiet night, Anna asked, "Aunt Aurora, do you regret anything?" Aurora thought for a long moment, the city lights flickering in her eyes. "I regret the years I stayed silent," she admitted softly. Silence is where abuse grows strongest. If I had spoken sooner, perhaps I would have spared myself some pain. But then again, perhaps the timing was meant to be, because now the lesson is louder than it ever could have been. She turned to Anna with a gentle smile. "And I do not regret standing up. I do not regret reclaiming my life. That is the gift I give to myself and to all who will listen." Anna hugged her tightly, whispering, "You've changed everything, Auntie. Not just for you, for all of us." Aurora closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of lavender from the balcony. She felt Robert's memory near, warm and approving. She thought of Oliver, her grandson, somewhere out there, growing older each day, and she thought of the countless strangers whose lives had intersected with hers through the simple, powerful act of telling the truth. The night was calm, and so was her heart. Her story had not ended in despair, but in renewal. From betrayal had come clarity, from humiliation had come strength, and from silence had come a voice that echoed far beyond her own walls. Aurora Hughes, once dismissed as a fragile widow, had proven that dignity has no expiration date. And as she blew out the candle on her desk, she whispered the words that had become her creed. It is never too late to stand up for yourself. It was a late autumn afternoon, the kind where golden leaves clung stubbornly to branches, resisting the coming winter. Aurora Hughes sat in her favorite chair by the window, a knitted shawl wrapped around her frail shoulders. Age had bent her spine and slowed her steps, but her eyes remained sharp, luminous, with the same fire that had once silenced a ballroom and swayed a courtroom. The foundation thrived beyond her wildest dreams. With Henry, Anna, and Patricia carrying the mission forward, its reach now spanned multiple states. Thousands of seniors had been saved from exploitation. Laws bore her name, the Hughes Act, a landmark piece of legislation protecting elderly rights. Aurora no longer attended meetings or interviews. Her days were quiet now, filled with books, tea, and the occasional visit from Anna, who was married with children of her own. Peace surrounded her, yet one small space in her heart remained unresolved: Ethan's legacy. One crisp afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, a hesitant knock sounded at her door. Aurora shuffled to open it, expecting Anna, or perhaps a neighbor, but when she turned the handle, her breath caught. There stood a young man, tall, with familiar hazel eyes and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Hughes?" he asked softly. "My name is Oliver. I think I'm your grandson." Aurora's hands trembled. For a moment she saw Ethan at 20, standing awkwardly with the same uncertain expression. She whispered, "Come in, child." Oliver stepped inside, clutching a worn backpack. "I've wanted to find you for years," he said, his voice quivering. "My mother never spoke kindly of you, but when I turned 18, I got a letter, something you set up, a trust fund. It had your name." Aurora's eyes glistened. "Yes, I couldn't be part of your life, but I wanted you to know you were never forgotten." He looked down, his voice breaking. "I need to understand. My father, Ethan, I don't know what to believe. People say terrible things, but I want to hear it from you." They sat together at the small kitchen table, steam rising from freshly brewed tea. Aurora told him the truth, not with venom, but with sorrowful honesty. She recounted the trial, the betrayal, the choices Ethan and Eleanor had made. She spared no detail, yet her words carried compassion. "Your father was not always that man," she said gently. "He was once a boy full of laughter, a boy I loved with all my heart. But choices shape us, Oliver, and his choices led him down a dark path. I could not follow him there." Oliver's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't hate him, but I don't want to become him either." Aurora reached across the table, placing her wrinkled hand over his. "Then you won't, because you've already taken the first step, seeking truth, not comfort. That's what makes you different." Days turned into weeks as Oliver visited often. He helped carry groceries, fix small things around the apartment, and listened to Aurora's stories of his grandfather, Robert, the man Ethan had once admired. For Oliver, it was like discovering roots he had been denied. For Aurora, it was like reclaiming a piece of family she thought forever lost. One evening, as the city lights twinkled, Oliver asked, "Do you forgive him, my father?" Aurora gazed at the horizon. "Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I cannot erase what he did, but I can choose not to let bitterness poison what remains of my life. And in seeing you, Oliver, I see the part of Ethan that was good. That is enough." Months later, Aurora attended a foundation gala, her final public appearance. Frail but radiant, she stood at the podium with Oliver at her side. "My time in this world grows shorter," she told the audience, "but I leave knowing the fight continues. This young man, my grandson, reminds me that even when one branch of the family tree breaks, new growth can spring from the same roots. Let him, and others like him, carry the work forward." The applause thundered, not just for her, but for the bridge between past and future she had built. One spring morning, Aurora passed quietly in her sleep, sunlight streaming through her curtains. On her bedside table lay her journal, open to her last entry. I began this journey humiliated, broken, afraid. I end it honored, whole and unafraid. Dignity is the inheritance I give, not money, not property, dignity and the courage to guard it. If Oliver and others after him remember only this, then I have lived well. At her memorial, hundreds gathered, neighbors, advocates, seniors she had saved. Oliver spoke with a voice steady and proud. My grandmother taught me that silence is never the answer. Her life was proof that it is never too late to fight back, never too late to reclaim your worth. She was more than a survivor. She was a light. And as candles flickered in the night, the name Aurora Hughes was no longer just a story of betrayal. It was a legacy of resilience, passed on to generations yet to come.